Imagine a time when the roar of longships thundered across the seas, when fierce warriors with axes in hand carved their destiny through fire and steel. Denmark and Norway were not just kingdoms, they were the beating heart of the Viking Age. Their legacy shaped battles, kingdoms, languages, and even the very borders of Europe. From gods and sagas to fearless explorers, the birth of the Viking Age, the story of Denmark and Norway, cannot be told without the Vikings. To understand their legacy, we first need to look back at how the Viking Age began. Historians usually say that the Viking Age started around the late 700s, but the roots of this time stretch even deeper into the soil of Scandinavia. Long before the world feared the Vikings, the people of Denmark and Norway were farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen, living close to the harsh northern seas. Life was not easy in Scandinavia. Winters were long and dark, summers were short, and the land was often rocky and difficult to farm. Families had to work hard to survive, and they depended heavily on the sea. The ocean was both a friend and an enemy. It gave them fish and allowed them to travel, but storms and waves could also take lives without warning. Growing up in this kind of environment built a culture of toughness, bravery, and adaptability. It was in these conditions that the first Viking communities formed. They were not yet the raiders we imagine today, but they were already skilled sailors and builders. Their longhouses stood as strong symbols of family and community. Inside, generations lived together under one roof. Men, women, and children all had roles to play. Farming, hunting, weaving, and crafting were everyday jobs. But there was also another skill that set them apart: shipbuilding. The people of Denmark and Norway designed ships that were unlike anything the rest of Europe had seen. The longship, with its sleek body and shallow bottom, could cut through the waves at high speed. It could sail across open seas, but also glide into shallow rivers. This meant Vikings could travel almost anywhere. Across the North Sea to England, down the rivers of France, or even deep into the lands of Eastern Europe. This incredible technology gave them power and freedom that few others had at the time. Religion and belief also shaped the early Vikings. They worshipped many gods, such as Odin, Thor, and Freya. These gods represented wisdom, war, storms, and fertility. The Vikings believed that courage in battle was rewarded in the afterlife. Warriors who died bravely were said to be taken to Valhalla, the great hall of Odin, where they would feast until the end of the world. This belief made them fearless and gave them strength in the face of danger. By the end of the 8th century, all these elements, hard living conditions, expert shipbuilding, and a warrior's belief system came together. It was the perfect recipe for expansion. The first recorded Viking raid happened in 793 at Lindisfarne, a small island monastery in England. The attack shocked the Christian world. To the monks, it seemed as if devils had come from the sea. To the Vikings, it was just the beginning of a new age of exploration and conquest. Denmark and Norway became the heartlands of this movement. From these countries, waves of raiders, traders, and settlers set out to change the map of Europe. They did not know it at the time, but they were starting a legacy that would last for centuries. The birth of the Viking Age was more than just a moment in history. It was the rise of a culture that valued courage, skill, and adventure. It was the moment when the world first felt the power of Denmark and Norway, a power that would echo across lands and seas for generations to come. Life in Viking society: when people think about Vikings, they often imagine fierce warriors with axes, shields, and horned helmets. But the truth is, the daily life of most people in Denmark and Norway during the Viking Age was very different. Yes, warriors and raiders were important, but they were only one part of a much bigger society. To really understand the Viking legacy, we need to look at how they lived, worked, and organized their world. Most Vikings were farmers. Even great chiefs and kings often owned farmland. Crops like barley, rye, and oats were grown to make bread and porridge. Vegetables such as onions, beans, and cabbage were also common. Livestock like cows, pigs, goats, and sheep were very valuable. These animals provided meat, milk, wool, and leather. Farming in the tough northern climate was not easy, but it was the backbone of Viking life. Fishing was another key part of survival. Norway, with its long coastline, offered rich waters full of cod, herring, and salmon. Denmark also benefited from being surrounded by the sea. Fish were eaten fresh, but they could also be dried or salted to last through the cold winters. Hunting added to their food supply. Deer, elk, and even seals were hunted for both meat and hides. Every part of an animal was used carefully, showing the Vikings' respect for resources. Viking homes were usually long houses made of wood, stone, or turf. These houses had one large room with a fire in the center for warmth and cooking. The roof was high and covered with thatch or wooden planks. Smoke from the fire filled the air, since there was no chimney, but the heat kept families alive through freezing winters. Families often lived together, including grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes even servants or slaves. Life was crowded, but community was everything. Society was organized into different classes. At the top were the jarls or nobles, who controlled land and wealth. Below them were the carls, the free farmers and craftsmen who made up most of the population. At the bottom were the thralls, or slaves. Thralls were often prisoners captured in raids, and they worked the hardest jobs. While slavery might seem shocking today, it was a normal part of life in many ancient societies, including among the Vikings. Craftsmanship was highly respected. Viking artisans were skilled at making weapons, jewelry, and everyday tools. They worked with wood, iron, silver, and even glass. Their designs often included patterns of knots, animals, and symbols from their myths. These crafts were not only useful but also beautiful, and many Viking objects are still found today in museums. The Vikings also loved storytelling. Around fires at night, they told sagas and poems about gods, heroes, and great battles. These stories were more than entertainment. It taught values like bravery, loyalty, and honor. Children grew up hearing about Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, and Loki's tricks. Storytelling helped keep the Viking spirit alive, even when times were hard. Life in Viking society was not only about fighting and raiding, it was about survival, family, community, and culture. Their daily lives built the foundation for everything they achieved. Without their farms, ships, homes, and traditions, the great Viking raids and explorations would never have been possible. Denmark and Norway were more than just lands of warriors. They were lands of strong families, skilled workers, and powerful traditions that shaped their legacy for centuries. The power of Viking ships. If there was one thing that truly set the Vikings of Denmark and Norway apart, it was their ships. These were not just boats. They were powerful tools of war, trade, and exploration. Without their ships, the Vikings would never have been able to raid distant lands, explore unknown territories, or spread their influence across Europe and beyond. The longship in particular became a symbol of Viking power and skill. The design of the Viking longship was revolutionary for its time. Unlike the heavy, slow ships used by other European peoples, the longship was light, narrow, and fast. Its shallow bottom allowed it to sail in both deep seas and shallow rivers. This gave the Vikings an incredible advantage. They could raid a coastal town, then push inland by rowing up rivers, reaching places no one expected them to go. Imagine living in a quiet village far from the coast, only to see Viking warriors suddenly appear on the riverbank. Their ships made this possible. Longships could also carry many men. Rows of oars lined the sides, letting warriors row together in perfect rhythm. At the same time, a single square sail could be raised to catch the wind, speeding the ship across open seas. This combination of wind and muscle made Viking ships some of the fastest in the world at that time. They could travel hundreds of miles in a matter of days, something few other people could do. Another amazing detail was the craftsmanship. Viking shipbuilders used wood from oak trees, carefully shaping each plank to fit tightly together. The ships were flexible, but strong, able to bend with the waves without breaking apart. Many longships had dragon or serpent heads carved at the prow, meant to scare enemies and even protect the ship from evil spirits. These designs also showed pride, as every ship was like a work of art. But Viking ships were not only for raiding. They were also used for trade and exploration. Nares, a different type of Viking ship, were wider and deeper than longships. These could carry cargo like furs, timber, and even livestock. With these ships, Vikings from Denmark and Norway traded as far away as the Middle East. They brought back silver, spices, silk, and other treasures, connecting the cold north with the riches of the south. The ships also carried settlers. Viking families sailed to new lands to build homes and farms. This is how Vikings reached Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Yes, nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Norse explorers like Leif Erikson sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and set foot on the shores of North America. All of this was possible because of the ships they built. The power of Viking ships also changed how enemies saw them. Coastal villages across England, France, and even Spain feared the sight of longships on the horizon. To see one was to know danger was coming. At the same time, allies and trading partners welcomed Viking ships, knowing they carried goods, stories, and opportunities. In the end, the ships of Denmark and Norway were more than wooden vessels. They were engines of history. They allowed the Vikings to become warriors, traders, settlers, and explorers all at once. They carried not just people, but also ideas, beliefs, and traditions. The legacy of the Vikings was built on the strength of their ships. And even today, the remains of longships found in burial mounds remind us of just how advanced and important these creations were. Raiders and conquerors. The part of Viking history that most people know best is their raids. Denmark and Norway became famous and feared for sending warriors across the seas to attack, plunder, and conquer. From small villages to mighty kingdoms, few places in Europe escaped the reach of Viking raids. These attacks were not random acts of violence. They were bold missions that helped the Vikings grow stronger and richer, while also spreading their influence far beyond Scandinavia. The first famous raid happened in 793 at Lindisfarne, a holy monastery on the coast of England. To the Christian monks, the sudden attack felt like a punishment from hell itself. But to the Vikings, it was an opportunity. Monasteries were rich with gold, silver, and treasures, yet weakly defended. They became easy targets, and the Vikings quickly gained a reputation for striking with speed and brutality. The stories of these attacks spread fast, and soon the word Viking became a symbol of fear across Europe. Raids were usually quick and carefully planned. Longships allowed the warriors to arrive suddenly, strike, and then leave before enemy forces could gather. The Vikings often attacked at dawn, when people were asleep and unprepared. They burned villages, seized livestock, captured people as slaves, and carried off anything valuable. Gold, jewelry, weapons, and fine clothing were all taken back to Denmark and Norway, where they boosted the wealth and power of local chieftains and kings. But the Vikings were not only raiders, they were also conquerors. Over time, they began to settle in the very lands they raided. In England, for example, they established the area known as the Denmaek, where Viking laws and customs ruled. In Ireland, they founded towns like Dublin, which started as Viking bases. In France, they settled in a region that became known as Normandy, named after the Northmen. From there, their descendants, the Normans, would go on to conquer even more lands, including England in 1066. These conquests were possible because of the Vikings' fighting skills. They were not knights in shining armor, but they were tough, disciplined, and fearless. Their weapons included swords, axes, and spears, and their round wooden shields gave them protection. In battle, they often fought in a shield wall, standing shoulder to shoulder with overlapping shields to form a wall of defense. This made them nearly unstoppable in open combat. Another reason for their success was their courage. Vikings believed that dying bravely in battle brought honor and a place in Valhalla, the Hall of the Gods. This made them dangerous opponents, because fear of death did not stop them. Instead, it drove them to fight harder, knowing their bravery would be remembered. Of course, not every raid ended in victory. Sometimes local armies pushed them back, and storms at sea could destroy ships before they even reached their targets. But the successes far outweighed the failures. The wealth gained from raids allowed Viking leaders to build larger armies, expand their territories, and secure more power. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Denmark and Norway were not just small northern kingdoms, they were major players in European politics. Kings in England, France, and other countries had to pay tribute, make treaties, or even hire Viking warriors as mercenaries. The fear and respect earned by the Vikings showed just how powerful Denmark and Norway had become. In the end, the image of the Viking raider, fierce, unstoppable, and unafraid, became one of the most lasting symbols of their legacy. But as we will see, their story was not only about blood and conquest. The Vikings also left behind a legacy of trade, culture, and exploration that shaped Europe in ways still felt today. Traders and explorers. When people think of Vikings, the first image is often of warriors with axes storming villages. But the Vikings of Denmark and Norway were more than raiders. They were also some of the greatest traders and explorers of their time. Their ships didn't just carry warriors. They carried goods, ideas, and cultures across vast distances. Because of this, the Vikings built trading networks that stretched farther than most people can imagine. Reaching from the cold fjords of Norway to the warm markets of the Middle East, Viking trade began close to home. Farmers, craftsmen, and fishermen all produced goods that could be traded with nearby villages. Soon, these small trades grew into something much larger. Denmark, sitting at the crossroads of Europe, became a key hub. It controlled the waterways that connected the Baltic Sea to the North Sea. This meant Viking traders could easily reach places like England, Germany, and France. Norway, with its long coastline, also became an important center for shipping and fishing. Together, Denmark and Norway were perfectly placed to build a trading empire. The goods they traded were both simple and valuable. From Scandinavia came furs, timber, iron, and fish. These were resources that other countries needed but did not have in abundance. In return, the Vikings received silver, glass, silk, wine, and spices from distant lands. Archaeologists have found Arabic coins in Viking graves, showing that silver from the Islamic world made its way north through trade. Imagine that? Coins minted in Baghdad ending up buried with a Viking in Denmark. Trading was not just about wealth, it was about connection. The Vikings met new cultures, learned new skills, and even adopted new fashions. Jewelry styles, weapon designs, and even art from distant lands influenced their own. These connections helped make Viking society richer and more diverse. But perhaps the most exciting part of Viking trade was their exploration. Driven by curiosity, opportunity, and sometimes the need for new land, the Vikings sailed into the unknown. From Norway, they set out westward, reaching the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland. Each step pushed them farther from home, but their ships carried them safely through the rough Atlantic seas. The boldest of these explorers was Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red. Around the year 1000, Leif sailed even farther, reaching the shores of North America, a place the Vikings called Vinland. This was nearly 500 years before Columbus. While the settlements in North America did not last, the journey proved just how advanced Viking exploration was. The Vikings also traveled eastward. Using rivers like the Volga and the Dnieper, they reached deep into modern-day Russia and Ukraine. Some even served as guards in Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. These Viking warriors, known as Varangians, became famous for their loyalty and skill. Once again, Denmark and Norway were at the heart of this global movement. Exploration and trade changed how others saw the Vikings. To some, they were still dangerous raiders. But to many, they became valuable partners in business and allies in politics. Viking traders brought the North into contact with the wider world, connecting distant cultures like never before. In the end, the Vikings of Denmark and Norway were not just destroyers of worlds, but builders of bridges. They built connections across continents, carried stories from one land to another, and left behind a legacy that went far beyond war. Their role as traders and explorers showed that the Viking spirit was not only about courage in battle, but also about curiosity, ambition, and the desire to reach beyond the horizon. Viking religion and mythology. One of the most fascinating parts of Viking culture in Denmark and Norway was their religion and mythology. The Vikings did not follow one god, like Christianity or Islam. Instead, they believed in many gods and goddesses, each with their own powers, personalities, and stories. These beliefs shaped how they lived, how they fought, and how they saw the world around them. At the top of their belief system was Odin, the Allfather. Odin was the god of wisdom, war, and poetry. He was always searching for knowledge, even if it cost him greatly. According to legend, he gave up one of his eyes to drink from the well of wisdom, proving that knowledge was more valuable than physical strength. To the Vikings, Odin represented the courage to seek truth, no matter the sacrifice. Another famous god was Thor, the god of thunder. Thor carried a mighty hammer called Mjolnir, which could crush mountains and defeat giants. He was the protector of both gods and humans, defending them from the chaotic forces that threatened their world. Farmers and warriors alike prayed to Thor for strength and protection. His image became so important that many Vikings wore hammer-shaped pendants around their necks, almost like a lucky charm. Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, was another central figure. She was connected to both romance and the cycles of nature, making her important to farmers and families. She also had a warrior side, choosing half of the brave dead to join her in her hall, while Odin took the other half to Valhalla. The Vikings believed their world was connected through a great tree called Yggdrasil. This tree stretched across 9 realms, each home to different beings, such as gods, giants, elves, dwarves, and humans. At the roots of Yggdrasil lived a dragon, while an eagle sat at its top, symbolizing the balance of life and death. This image of the world tree gave the Vikings a way to imagine their universe as one great living system. The afterlife was also an important part of their belief. For warriors, the greatest honor was to die bravely in battle and be carried to Valhalla, Odin's Hall of Heroes. There, they would feast and train until the end of the world, known as Ragnarok. But not all souls went to Valhalla. Some went to Hell, a cold and shadowy place ruled by the goddess Hel. Others might find peace in different realms, depending on how they lived their lives. Myths about gods, giants, and magical creatures were told around fires on long winter nights. These stories were passed down by word of mouth, turning into sagas and poems that still survive today. They were not only entertainment, but also lessons about bravery, loyalty, betrayal, and fate. A child listening to these tales in Denmark or Norway would grow up knowing that life was full of struggle. But courage and honor could bring greatness. Religion also guided daily practices. Sacrifices of animals, food, or sometimes even weapons were made to honor the gods and ask for blessings. Sacred sites such as groves, springs, and stones were places of worship. Later, large wooden temples were built for ceremonies and festivals. These gatherings strengthened the bond between people, gods, and nature. Even after Christianity began to spread through Scandinavia, many old Viking beliefs stayed alive. People often mixed both religions, wearing crosses alongside Thor's hammer or celebrating Christian holidays with Viking traditions. This blending of beliefs shows how deeply rooted their mythology was in their culture. The religion of the Vikings was not just about gods in the sky. It was about how people in Denmark and Norway understood their place in the world, gave them courage in battle, comfort in death, and inspiration in life. Their myths and legends remain some of the most powerful stories ever told.
Oh.
continuing to capture the imagination of people all over the world. Kings and leaders of the Vikings. The Viking Age was not just about warriors, ships, and raids. It was also about powerful leaders who guided Denmark and Norway during these times. These kings and chiefs played huge roles in shaping Viking society and expanding their influence across Europe. Without strong leadership, the Viking legacy might not have been as great as it became. At first, the Vikings did not have one king ruling over all of Denmark or all of Norway. Instead, different regions were controlled by local chiefs, called jarls. These men led their people in battle, protected their lands, and made decisions for their communities. Over time, though, powerful leaders rose above the rest, uniting larger territories and creating kingdoms that could stand alongside the great powers of Europe. One of the most famous kings of Denmark was Harald Bluetooth. He ruled during the 10th century and is remembered for uniting much of Denmark under one crown. Harald was also important because he helped bring Christianity to his people. In fact, the modern Bluetooth wireless technology is named after him. Because just as he united Denmark, Bluetooth connects devices today. Harald's runestone, a carved stone monument in Jelling, still stands as a symbol of his rule and achievements. Another powerful Danish king was Sweyn Forkbeard, the son of Harald Bluetooth. Sweyn became one of the most feared rulers of his time. He led invasions into England and even captured London. For a short time, he ruled as the King of England, making Denmark one of the strongest kingdoms in Europe. After his death, his son Cnut the Great continued his work, building what became known as the North Sea Empire. This empire included Denmark, Norway, and England, an incredible achievement that showed how far Viking power could reach. Norway also had great leaders. One of the most legendary was Harald Fairhair. According to sagas, he became the first king to unite Norway after winning many battles. Before him, Norway was divided into smaller regions ruled by local chiefs. Harald's vision of a united Norway laid the foundation for the nation's future. Another important Norwegian king was Olaf Tryggvason. He ruled at the end of the 10th century and played a key role in spreading Christianity in Norway. Olaf was known as both a fierce warrior and a strong believer, often forcing people to accept the new faith. While his methods were harsh, his actions changed the spiritual path of Norway forever. Cnut the Great deserves special mention because he linked Denmark and Norway with England, creating one of the largest northern empires of the time. He was not only a warrior, but also a skilled ruler who managed to balance power, trade, and religion. His empire showed the peak of Viking influence in Europe. The stories of these kings and leaders remind us that the Viking Age was not just chaos and raids. It was also a time of organization, law, and ambition. Great rulers brought unity, wealth, and new ideas to their lands. They built alliances, fought wars, and left behind monuments that can still be seen today. In the end, the kings of Denmark and Norway turned Viking warriors into nations. Their leadership gave strength to their people and helped spread Viking culture far beyond Scandinavia. Without them, the Viking legacy might have been lost. But with them, it became a story that continues to shape history even today. Viking settlements and colonies, the Vikings of Denmark and Norway, were not only raiders and traders, they were also settlers. Wherever they traveled, they left behind more than fear and battle scars. They built towns, farms, and colonies that lasted for generations. These settlements spread Viking culture far beyond Scandinavia and left marks on Europe and even across the Atlantic Ocean. One of the best-known Viking settlements was in England. After many raids, the Vikings began to stay instead of leaving. They took over large areas, especially in the north and east, which became known as the Dano. In these lands, Viking laws and customs ruled. Farmers grew crops, craftsmen made tools, and traders brought goods from across the seas. The English and Vikings often fought, but over time, they also lived side by side, mixing languages, traditions, and even families. Many English towns, like York, still show Viking influence in their names and history. Ireland also became home to Viking settlers. Around the 9th century, the Vikings founded Dublin, which started as a small trading camp. Over time, it grew into a major city. The Vikings built ships there, traded goods, and created a strong base for raids into other parts of Ireland. Today, Dublin is one of Europe's great capitals, but its roots trace back to the Viking Age. In France, the Vikings established Normandy, which means land of the Northmen. After years of raids along the French coast, the Viking leader Rollo made a deal with the French king in 911. In exchange for peace, Rollo and his people were given land. They settled there, married into local families, and blended Viking traditions with French culture. The Normans, as they came to be known, became powerful. In 1066, William the Conqueror, a descendant of Rollo, led the Norman invasion of England, changing English history forever. But Viking settlements were not limited to Europe. From Norway, brave explorers sailed west and built colonies in new lands. They reached Iceland in the 9th century and quickly established farms and communities. Iceland became a thriving Viking society, known for its sagas and storytelling. From there, settlers pushed even farther, reaching Greenland around 985. Eric the Red, one of the most famous Norse explorers, led the first groups to build farms on Greenland's icy shores.
Ow.
The most daring settlement attempt was in North America. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, Eric the Red's son, sailed across the Atlantic and reached a land the Vikings called Vinland. Archaeological evidence at Lonzo Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, shows that the Vikings built houses and stayed there for a time. While these colonies did not last, they proved that the Vikings were among the first Europeans to reach the New World. Life in these settlements was not easy. Winters were harsh, enemies were common, and survival required hard work. Still, the Vikings adapted quickly. They built farms, raised livestock, and traded with local people. Their settlements were not just temporary camps, but real communities where families lived, children grew up, and cultures blended. The colonies of the Vikings show us that they were not only destroyers, but also builders. They created lasting towns, spread their language and traditions, and left a permanent mark on the lands they touched. From Dublin to Normandy, from Iceland to Greenland, fingerprints of Denmark and Norway's Vikings are still visible today. The coming of Christianity, one of the biggest changes in the history of Denmark and Norway during the Viking Age, was the arrival of Christianity. At the beginning, the Vikings worshipped their old gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya. Their world was filled with myths, rituals, and sacrifices. But by the end of the Viking Age, much of Scandinavia had converted to Christianity. This shift did not happen overnight. It took centuries of trade, war, and persuasion before the new religion replaced the old beliefs. Christianity first reached the Vikings through contact with other lands. Viking traders and raiders traveled to England, France, and Germany, where Christianity was already strong. Some Vikings were captured in battle and lived in Christian lands, where they learned about the new faith. Others married Christian women or made deals with Christian rulers. Slowly, the ideas of this new religion began to spread back into Denmark and Norway. At first, many Vikings resisted. The old gods had guided them for generations. Odin gave wisdom, Thor gave protection, and Freya gave fertility and love. To abandon them felt like betraying their ancestors. But the influence of Christianity kept growing. Kings and leaders soon realized that adopting Christianity could help them gain power and respect across Europe. Christian rulers in other countries would see them as allies instead of enemies. One of the most important figures in this change was King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark. In the 10th century, he officially converted to Christianity and encouraged his people to do the same. His famous runestone in Jelling declares that he made the Danes Christian. This was a turning point, because once the king accepted the new faith, many of his followers began to follow as well. In Norway, King Olaf Tryggvason and later King Olaf Haraldsson, also known as Saint Olaf, played similar roles. Olaf Tryggvason returned from abroad as a Christian and worked to spread the faith across Norway, often using force. Saint Olaf continued this mission, and after his death in battle in 1030, he was honored as a Christian martyr. His sainthood made Christianity even stronger in Norway, and his shrine became a center of faith. The spread of Christianity brought big changes. Churches were built, replacing the old wooden temples. Priests and missionaries taught new ways of worship. The Bible introduced different moral laws, and new traditions like baptism and Christian holidays became part of Viking life. Slowly, the old gods faded into myths and legends, remembered in stories, but no longer worshipped. This change also brought Denmark and Norway closer to the rest of Europe. As Christian kingdoms, they could join alliances, trade more easily, and take part in the growing network of Christian rulers. While some people missed the old ways, many saw Christianity as a path to peace and stability. Still, the old beliefs did not disappear completely. For many years, people blended the two religions. A Viking might wear a Thor's hammer pendant alongside a Christian cross, or celebrate both pagan and Christian festivals. This blending shows how deeply rooted Viking traditions were, even as new beliefs took over. The coming of Christianity marked the end of one age and the beginning of another. It changed how people in Denmark and Norway saw themselves and their place in the world. The fearless pagans who once sailed under the eyes of Odin were now part of a Christian Europe, yet the stories of their gods and heroes remained alive, becoming part of the rich legacy that still fascinates us today. The Viking legacy, the Viking Age, eventually came to an end. But the legacy of Denmark and Norway's Vikings has never disappeared. Their story is not only about war, raids, and bloodshed. It is also about exploration, culture, and the strength of a people who left their mark on the world. Even today, more than 1,000 years later, we can still see the influence of the Vikings in our languages, traditions, cities, and even our imagination. One of the clearest parts of their legacy is geography. Towns like Dublin in Ireland, York in England, and Normandy in France were shaped by Viking settlers. These places grew from small camps into major cities that still exist today. The Vikings also helped shape the borders and politics of Europe. Their invasions forced kingdoms like England and France to grow stronger in defense. In some ways, the Viking threat pushed Europe toward becoming the powerful nations we know now. Language is another lasting influence. Many English words come from Old Norse, the language of the Vikings. Words like sky, egg, knife, and window all came from them. Even days of the week carry Viking roots. Thursday is named after Thor, and Wednesday after Odin Woden. This shows how deeply Viking culture mixed with the people they met. Vikings also left behind great stories, where sagas, myths, and poems are still read around the world. Tales of Odin, Thor, Loki, and the final battle of Ragnarok continue to inspire books, movies, and TV shows today. These myths are not just ancient stories. They are part of a living culture that continues to capture imaginations. From comic books to Hollywood films, Viking gods and heroes live on in modern culture. Archaeology also reveals their greatness. Viking ships, jewelry, weapons, and runestones have been found across Europe. Each artifact tells a story of skilled craftsmanship and bold journeys. Museums in Denmark and Norway proudly display these treasures, reminding us that the Vikings were not only fighters, but also builders, artists, and explorers. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Vikings is their spirit of adventure. They were not afraid to sail into unknown waters, to risk everything for discovery and opportunity. From Greenland to North America, from Russia to Constantinople, they traveled farther than almost anyone else of their time. This courage to push beyond the horizon is something that still inspires people today. At the same time, the Vikings remind us of the complexity of history. They were feared for their raids, but they also created towns and trade networks. They destroyed, but they also built. They were warriors, but also farmers, poets, and explorers. This mix of brutality and creativity is what makes their story so powerful. By the end of the Viking Age, Denmark and Norway had become Christian kingdoms, connected to the rest of Europe. But the memory of the Viking Age never faded. Their ships, myths, and legends kept their spirit alive, and their influence can still be felt in the modern world. The Viking legacy is not only about the past, it is about how their courage, skill, and imagination continue to inspire us today. From the words we speak to the cities we live in, from the stories we tell to the technologies we admire, the Vikings of Denmark and Norway are still with us. Their age may have ended, but their legacy sails on across the seas of history forever. The saga of the Vikings doesn't end here. It lives on in you. If their courage, their ships, and their legends amazed you, then join our shield wall by hitting that like button. Subscribe now, because more epic journeys from history are waiting to set sail right here. And remember, every legend begins with a single story. Will you be part of the next one?